Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's June 15th, 2022, and this week we're going to be answering the following three questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last few days. First up, how can you get your international education plans heard on campus? Second, is it possible to flip the international admissions process? And finally, what's happening north of the border with international students in Canada? We'll answer these three questions and more today on the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. And for those of you that are new to the Roundup, what we do each week here on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Eastern Time is we go in depth into three news stories or themes we've seen in news stories the last week and give our takes on how these news stories can and should be interpreted as it relates to international education efforts on your campus. Maybe some of it is just FYI as to what's going on in the world related to these international ed topics that are our heart and soul and our profession. And other times it's more philosophical in terms of how you can leverage certain tools or take certain perspectives to enhance what you do in international education. So let's get right into it. Our news stories that we cover are summarized each week in our SMIE Consulting newsletter. That's called All the SMIE News Fit to Share. And if you're wondering what SMIE is, it's social media and international education, my two passions professionally. And what we do, the newsletter comes out on Mondays on 9 a.m. Eastern Time for those that have subscribed through our website. And I'll be putting the links to the website in our comment section on the Facebook page at smieconsulting.org/subscribe if you want to go there now. Alternately, if you're on LinkedIn, we do publish that newsletter every Monday as well. Same content that's on the website. Website newsletter subscription you can get through LinkedIn if that's where you prefer to digest your news content, where I summarize anywhere from 4 or 5 social media stories and then 15 to 20 to 30 some weeks international education stories that give our short takes, hot takes on those issues of the day. So when that comes out on Monday morning, we then take a look at the themes that we see developing and then cover 3 of those themes here on the Roundup on Wednesdays. So let's get into our first question of the day. And that is, how can you get your international education plans heard on campus? Now, this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart because when on every campus I've been on in my almost 30 years in the business, having senior leadership know about your plans was the golden ticket. Know about it, 1, and 2, agree with it, and 3, fund it. And those are the things that really will make a difference in terms of the success or failure of your efforts long term. Now, what I do recommend is there are a lot of great articles out there, a lot of great services that you can look into, a lot of great providers. Part of my consulting business is working with institutions to strategize and develop those plans, and I certainly hope that you get a chance to check out the various resources that are out there. And I'm certainly biased towards my own, but there are certainly plenty of companies that will do that. One of those that I reference quite often in our newsletter and often on here on the Roundup is intl. They provide a lot of amazing resources and to help you get a hold of your digital strategies related to international recruitment, backing them up with strong data. They can do some of the heavy lifting for you in terms of campaigns that you might want to run in specific countries. And there's been a few of those lately that they profile on their site and in their blogs. But I do want to reference today one article that came out post-NAFSA, and this is called The Lament That Goes Nowhere, A New Perspective. And what Ben Waxman, who's the CEO of intl, means by this is the lament is that we're doing such great things in our international operations, but no one ever hears us. No one listens. We could be bringing in 10-15% increases in your new international student enrollments each year, but that never gets heard up the chain or never gets recognized and appreciated and then supported up the chain. based on all the great things that you might have been doing to get there. So what Ben has answered in his article here is getting to have more than just your international office support what you're doing in international education in terms of bringing in more international students, supporting them better when they're on campus, that type of thing. So the questions that get asked that he references in the article: how do they think we will get growth outcomes they want if they don't support us? Why are they not seeing our value or valuing our success, our potential, our hard work? Why do the resources always go to this other office, not us? So it's really a matter of understanding your dynamics on campus. And for those that have been following the Roundup and our newsletter and our services at SMIE Consulting, you know that our foundation of all we do in international education should be the 6 P's of strategic international enrollment management. And those are perspective, those are planning, partners, platforms, personalization, and peers. All of those are if you have these 6 as your guiding principles moving forward, you're going to attach relevance to what Ben is talking about here in his article, but also you're going to see the value of adapting these principles to everything you do in terms of who you work with, in terms of where you spend your time, what platforms you use, who are your partners that help you leverage not only your goals, not only outside the university but on college campus, but also those that are directly involved with the current student life cycle. Because the reality is, you're may be responsible for just that front end of admissions and recruitment and enrollment. Another office might have orientation, another office might have handle student services, and then there's career services and alumni at the end. But really, that whole life cycle for international students, from initial prospect to successful alum, that is your purview. You're the office that probably has the most input in terms of what that looks like. But you're not the only office that can or should be responsible for that entire life cycle. No one office should. Because frankly, it does take a village to graduate an international student, enroll, serve, and graduate successfully international students. And the needs are different for international students on a lot of different levels. Some are the same, but most are very different. So it's up to your office and in terms of rallying your support on campus, rallying champions in other departments that know and appreciate what you do, and that can also advocate for you when the time comes. But also the key is developing, you can't operate in a vacuum. You have to operate in reality, and the reality is offices are competing for resources on campus. You have to show value, and you have to have people who can help you show value and help support the projects that you're working on. And the more you couch what you do in the language of, we're responsible for the entire life cycle of international students. Our role in our international office may be just parts 2, 3, and 4, or it might be 1 through 2. Maybe it's all 6 or 7 parts of that journey that international students are on. But you can't, you don't operate. You can be very successful in what you do, but if the rest of the campus isn't supporting students at the same level that you are, then there are going to be problems potentially down the line. So Ben makes the great article, great commentary in terms of what is important. That is, you can't just go, woe is me all the time. You need to be proactive. You need to be managing up, and that's a word that I've used for the last 5 or 6 years in what I do whenever I've talked to folks on campus. Is how are you managing your relationship, not only with your staff, but with your superiors, your direct supervisors, and depending on how far away you are from the president's ear, how are those people up the chain supporting you or not? How are you managing that relationship? So keeping them in the loop on some bigger picture things that might be impacting what you do, or we need to be aware of this, or we need to have our government relations folks advocate for this change. How active are you or those in your office who can, or your supervisor who might be your direct champion, making those efforts known. So what data are you using? How are you presenting that? What thought leadership have you demonstrated on campus, but in your field as well? and the relationships. I talked about the partners earlier. What relationships with internal or external influencers have you built? These are the institutional partnerships. You might have relationships with agents, Education USA, other service providers that help you get where you need to be institutionally as in terms of enrollment. So there's some great data in here, or not data, but great thought-provoking, motivational choices that you can make to take that next step and to make sure that you're not just crying in the wilderness. You actually have a plan for not just enrolling those students, but how to manage your getting what you need in your office to do your jobs better. And help the campus grow stronger as a result of your work and the work that you're trying to do to grow the success rate of international students on campus. And ultimately, that's what we should all be concerned with. How do we make, and this goes for international students, it goes for first-generation students, it goes for students of color that might be on campus, all of the different areas of your campus that have special attention paid to them. Each of those sets of student groups may have very different needs, and there has to be plans campus-wide to accommodate those needs and to serve them best. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. That cannot work in this day and age. So it's important that you articulate what those needs are, that you say, here's what we need to be doing in housing, in food service, in orientation, in academic advising, in career services in terms of internships and job placements and that type of thing, as well as alumni. Getting your entire campus team together, pulling in the same direction for your students. And every group of students will have their individual needs. And that's not your responsibility for those others. It's your responsibility for your core group. And that's really what Ben's after here, is you have to fight that fight. You can't, and best part is you shouldn't do it alone. Because if it is, you're not going to be nearly as successful as one who does that and has a team of supporters, a team of champions behind them to make that argument collectively, and having the right data, and showing your leadership, and showing your network that can help support you in getting where you and the campus need to be regarding international student recruitment. So that's a fantastic way to start this conversation in terms of how you can get your international education plans heard on campus. It's getting those champions to help you support managing up. It's keeping people in the loop as plans change, as events of the world impact what you do, and making sure the right people at your university are able to act quickly on your behalf, on your international students' behalf, to make sure that their interests are protected. So that's really a fantastic start on getting your international ed plans heard on campus, is making sure that you're not alone, making sure you know what you're talking about and can back it up with data, and that you're managing up throughout that process. So those are some of the three keys that Ben talks about, and I certainly agree with, in terms of making sure that it's not just you operating in that vacuum. So let's move on to question 2. Now, the question itself might seem a little bit strange, but is it possible to flip the international admissions process? And what we're talking about here is really how our admissions processes are set up in the United States. And I've made this comment several times in presentations I've done over the years, that right now in the U.S., our admissions processes are far too complicated in the large. Not every institution is this way, but because we are a nation of individuals and value independence and individuality, this approach does not always appear favorably to international students when they're trying to figure out where to apply, what schools require what tests, what are the deadlines, and all these extra requirements that might be needed for an application, like an essay or a teacher recommendation, where most parts of the world, they don't know what teacher recommendations are, and if they have to write one, they don't know how to write one. So there's a lot of complications that go into this mix. But the question of, is it possible to flip the admissions process, is coming out of an article that I saw this past week Inside Higher Ed, calling for a radical change for admissions. And what the system, what they're talking about here, is not for the elite universities around the country that are very selective and accept less than 5 or 6% of their applicants each year. We're talking here about the greater majority of institutions that are selective to less selective, or open admissions, really. And this is a new way for colleges to admit students. That is, it's a company called Concourse that's been using their system to admit international students to American and international universities for the last couple of years. And the model is fairly different. Colleges would look at the students and make offers of admissions based on their portfolios without even knowing their names in this new environment. So students put their profiles in, their grades, transcripts, all of that into a basic profile that's anonymous that students would then be selected by institutions that they do the hard work putting their profile together with all the grades and everything, and then you make grades, interests, other information, that type of thing. And the goal would be to have offers of admission come directly from institutions who go in and self-select students that they think meet their needs and would be good fits for them. So in effect, you're applying to that student to get their interest, to get their enrollment. So it's what I think is a real fascinating approach. This is last year the program had a little over 2,000 international students participate in this project. The program is small because it's new, and they're planning to expand, I think, 4 or 5 times in the coming year. David Hawkins, a good friend over at NACAC, has been there for ages, Chief Education and Policy Officer there. He says he sees this approach as an innovative, possibly disruptive approach to connecting students and with colleges and vice versa. So what it is doing is based on a profile, institutions based on a profile that the student puts in. It's not name specific yet. It's based on it's anonymous until they make an offer. Where they're from, interests, that type of thing you'll know, but you will not know their name or the personal information on the transcript is anonymized until offers are made. So it's a very different, and no other companies really doing that right now. Can that be done globally? That's obviously a very different question, but as a model, I want to talk about the answer to this question as a model when talking about flipping the admissions process. And that is not necessarily doing what Concourse is doing, but really taking the approach of flipping the admissions process for international students. Potentially could be a Concourse model someday globally, but it is looking at the admissions process as one where, yes, your admissions process is probably fairly straightforward. You have X, Y, and Z requirements. You might have a deadline. You might be rolling admissions, but in the end, you do have an end deadline for international students, even if you are rolling, because if they're outside the country, they're not going to be able to get in if you don't admit them by June 1st or May 1st or whatever deadline you might have to get them on campus by the fall because of visa processing and all that fun stuff. But so let's look at that admissions process piece. This also goes back to the first P of the 6 Ps of strategic international enrollment management that we talk about often, and that's called perspective. Now, the perspective here is when I talk, there's a number of different levels to perspective. It's internal perspective, understanding your campus and what the lay of the land is internationally and support internationally, what the campus feels about that. But the reality is perspective that institutions need to have and international admissions offices need to have as they're approaching students abroad is recognizing that they are potentially looking at not just you and your major competitor in the United States, which may be very different internationally than it is domestically in terms of other U.S. institutions you might be competing for the same students. You're competing against other countries' universities for the interest and attention of that student. And you're competing against them because we in the United States have often felt, because of our reputation as the #1 destination for international students, that we don't have to work very hard for these international students, that they should just come to us and enroll and be happy that they're here, and they'll have the best experience anyway. So the reality is other institutions in other countries have international ed strategies that have well-funded outreach campaigns, have much more simplified admissions processes. And that's the piece here that I want to focus on than we do here in the United States. Unless you're an open enrollment college, community college or university, you have admissions requirements. Maybe as simple as an application transcript and an English proficiency test. That's probably the simplest, an application fee maybe. Most people have application fees. Maybe you can waive them, maybe you can't. But those 3 or 4 things are the minimums that you need to make a decision. Others might have essays, might have SAT, ACT requirements still, even in this day and age post-pandemic. May have recommendation letters, activity lists, auditions, and all these other things. And there's still a place for that in some selective programs that have limited capacity, and in the arts, certainly makes sense to have some way of evaluating students in that regard. But when you talk about the majority of students that are coming to our country, that might also be looking at Canada, might be looking at the UK, might be looking at Australia, they have a much more streamlined admissions process in almost all cases. There are, in the UK, there's one application that you fill out for all undergraduate programs. There's one application you fill out for all graduate programs in the UK. So you don't have a choice. That's the way you go. And the application process and timelines are much tend to be much more open. With the exception of the UK, they have early deadlines in maybe December, January, for where evaluations are made on predicted grades for domestic students that are continuing on based on their AS levels and A levels, predicted marks. And then they have what's called clearing in the summer, which is literally a month or 2 before classes start, where if you didn't get in your first choice, based on openings that may have opened up at that institution that you were looking for, that you didn't get initially into a program you wanted, you may be able to switch your choice and clear your way into the program that you want. So that process can also allow for a greater flexibility for students to find you. But in the United States, we don't have that process. We make it more complicated than any other place in the world to be admitted to our institutions in the lion's share of cases. And it's more complicated because of the extra requirements we have. And when I say the answer to this question, is it possible to flip the international admissions process? Perhaps not to the extent universally as Concourse is trying to do with their model, where you pick the students based on their profile, not on their names. And that is how you admit them. Some colleges might say, how do we do that? And not really be able to wrap their heads around that. But what I'm saying is a simpler process is to realize that you need to recruit. It sounds kind of inane to say you need to recruit these students. Well, of course, that's where an international recruitment office or an international admissions and recruitment office. That's in my title. I'm an international recruitment officer. But the reality is, you are to recruit them, but the way your process is set up is very much you're the final arbiter in that process. That you don't really give the student a chance to be selected. That they show interest in you by applying, obviously, and you spend your time trying to convince them once they've applied that you by responding quickly and making decisions quickly on their applications, by taking advantage of what interests that they have that you can leverage and talk about how they will be happy on your campus because we have X and Y to help you support your efforts to do Z. So these are the things that matter in terms of what you do now, but think about it in terms of flipping it, that you need to be more on the front foot here, that you can simplify your admissions process, You can get rid of the test scores, SAT and ACT test scores. You can look at your English proficiency standards in terms of exemptions for students from countries that have English as their language of instruction and as a national language, other education systems that are taught in English or that are international in nature, that you could give exemptions to students enrolled in those rather than still requiring a TOEFL IELTS. You can not have a essay or teacher recommendation requirement. You can make the process very simple and, in effect, go after students that you, in a way that perhaps you haven't done before, where you do have information from a college fair that you meet a student at, or virtually or in person, or if you receive a letter or an email from a student that details all their interests, and you can particularly target that student in response and say, we want you to apply because your profile looks fantastic, you're the kind of student we want on campus, all of those things. So while the concourse model is attractive, it's not universally available. It's something that maybe versions of it may evolve over time, but right now there are numbers of providers out there that have college search profiles that students look at your information and then decide whether they want to request more information. That's the standard way of getting information from universities, or them students finding out information about universities. But is there a way that universities can be going after students more directly, when you can look at a profile of a student, maybe you can search from where they are in the world, and then you can look at interests, look at academics, and then tailor a response to them in an offer that you make, an admissions offer that you make that would be attractive to them and that's tailored to them and is personalized to them, so that they can see, oh my goodness, this school really cares about me, or yes, they're going to be a really good match because they have X, Y, and Z, and that's what I want. So yes, it's possible to flip the admissions process, and if you think about it in the terms of shifting your perspective on who you're competing against, not just other U.S. institutions, but competitors around the world that have much simpler admissions process, what's your competitive advantage going to be? Thinking about that and how you talk to prospective students and the admissions process is going to give you that edge. So, last question of the day. What's happening north of the border when it comes to international students in Canada? There have been a couple of stories in the past week that have been particularly troubling, and those have to do with one is one we've covered here on the Roundup in the past, and that is some of the vocational colleges in Quebec province that are under the M Star, I think. What are they called? The M colleges were required to close a few months ago because they basically had used attracted students that for tuition fees from overseas, primarily from India, and then had to poor management at those colleges forced shutdowns because they had overpaid for the students that had enrolled, and whatever the case may be. That in Quebec it's gotten so bad that it's now an integrity issue, that they are addressing gaps that's been brought to light by certain unsubsidized private colleges. And here we're talking about those that are opening really to provide a pipeline for international students to come, short-term vocational programs, and then work after graduation and become citizens or residents for eventual residents after they have their work permits. Colleges will claim ignorance and that they've done nothing wrong, but that these colleges play an important role in the province and the country as a whole in terms of bringing in these students. We see that these colleges that might have been performing well are now, what's happening in Quebec province is the entire province is removing these unsubsidized private colleges, vocational colleges, removing their ability to enroll international students as a result of the poor management of those colleges that were forced to close. Now, Quebec province, each of the provinces will make their own determinations as to the ability of the colleges or universities in their province to enroll international students. And this is something that in Quebec, that pathway is now closed. So it's a significant issue. The Indian students that have been coming to these vocational colleges in Quebec are no longer going to be able to do that. The agreement the province made was actually had to get Ottawa's blessing, the federal government's blessing, to address the gaps in what they call the murky private college sector, and that has led to so obviously those colleges that were on the up and had been doing things well, that are on subsidized privates, they're now suffering as a result of the poor performance of some of the less than honest colleges that have been forced to close and have been continued to drag the sector down that way. So that's one major issue. And is Quebec the only province that's experienced this? Not at all. You can see similar issues in Ontario, where they have even more of these private unsubsidized colleges, particularly bringing in hundreds of thousands of Indian students to these vocational programs. A lot of them have had problems during the pandemic. A lot of them have had significant financial challenges because of students not being able to get visas or study permits, as they say in Canada, to get in. But the final piece of that, another story, another troubling piece that's a more countrywide, is Canada's Immigration Department the data has shown that African admitted students are getting their visas denied at a much higher rate than any other demographic around the world. 49% of study permits were denied in 2020, down to 40% in 2021. But refusal rates were, according to this Pine News article, were particularly high among students from Africa. And that's even despite the government's Francophone immigration targets, that students from French-speaking African countries do play an important role in France, or in coming to Canadian provinces, particularly in Quebec. That the Francophone African refusal rate was 73%, and the rest of Africa was 75%. That's compared to the overall 49% in 2020 and 2021 numbers of 40%. So significantly higher. So that is a real concern for Canadian universities that are trying to improve their international profile by bringing in more of these African students. They're getting denied at a much higher rate. And I know in the U.S. We probably have similar concerns, though we don't have the data to really back that up. We hear what happens in certain key markets in Nigeria, Ghana, what have you, that the visa rate denial rates are higher. The State Department never puts a total visa, a country-by-country student visa denial rate information out there. You got to do a lot of digging to try and piece that together. But that's particularly a concern for the universities in Canada who are trying to go that extra mile or two to internationalize, and facing these real challenges in Africa about getting students admitted and doing all the hard work to get them interested and convince them that they want to be on their campus. But the realities have been that only 1 in 4 are actually getting their visas. So some troubling news north of the border, but certainly we're not immune from that south of the border either. And we'll cover a lot more of those stories over the summer months too, as the visa race hots up. So that's all we have for you today on the Midweek Roundup. Thank you so much for joining us. And do be sure to subscribe for a podcast of the version of the Roundup if you prefer to catch the audio-only version of this, as well as subscribe to the newsletter. So until next time, we wish you the very best. Have a good day.